Look, it's not easy, frankly. And as Paul Kelly from The Australian points out, those advocating conservative forces have been on the losing end now for 20 years. There's hardly a battle that we've won. I think that's actually right. I can't think of too many that we've won. I think the only thing I can say is that we should never give up, because Christ never gave up. Remember, he loved us not because we loved him, but when we were at enmity to him, and he doesn't give up on us. And we shouldn't either. I think it's one of the great lessons. He goes on loving us through thick and thin, and love requires that we go on putting the case through thick and thin. And it may very well be in the end that we are squashed. I read a letter from a pastor in Victoria the other day, somewhere I can't remember, in social media, saying that there are certain people now who come to him for prayer and then he will have to say, I'm really sorry, the state's legislation really makes it dangerous for us to do so. I think that's pretty profound, frankly. And when the state starts to decide, along with the judicial system, what is sacred and what is not, it is in clear denial of everything our tradition stands for. Our first freedom really is freedom of conscience. We learnt not to burn one another at the stake because we disagreed. It was barbaric. We finally realised it was far from Christ-like, and besides it was dumb, because today's minority often turns out to be tomorrow's majority, and then somebody else gets burnt at the stake. So we learnt that to be truly free, we had to allow one another to respond to their conscience. So if your religion informs your conscience and your religion says that you should take a position on an issue, or you should undertake activities to free slaves or to work for the marginalised or the dispossessed or for a stronger economy or more opportunity or whatever it happens to be, a free society allows you to exercise your conscience. And now we are in danger of no longer being a free society. I love history. I cannot think of a society anywhere that has restricted conscience or religion that is still free. I cannot think of one. If somebody can point to one, please let me know what it is, because it'll be the first that anybody's been able to point to. This is a real problem. Some research amongst young people in New York 10 years ago, a decade ago, found that when it came to issues of right and wrong, many young people had no language to deal with it at all. It's disappeared. It's very hard to communicate. And so how, in the context of that problem, do we try to convey the things that we believe in very deeply? Well, it's not new. You know, the young church faced that problem everywhere. And we've been the inheritors of a culture that until recently has had a broad understanding and has understood the language, and quite quickly it's washed out. I think I'd make two observations. The first is that we have to get much better at gently probing people who put up alternative views. It's very useful, I think, to say, is that what you believe? Because often they haven't really thought it through. Why do you believe that? Often they won't be able to reference any great deep intellectual framework. What do you think it means? And how will it play out? And I think we can gently point to the society that all of this division has produced. If the forces of progressivism are right in the direction that they are taking our culture, and if our young people are our future, and if they are the canary in the mine shaft, why is it that by any measure we now have higher levels of anxiety, of depression, and of self-harm amongst our young people? The other point that I would make is this. In the end, it's sometimes easier and wiser for us, I think, to say, well, I take this position because I believe in the Christian faith and its teachings. It's not necessarily something, and I don't want to sound false about this, that I have thought up or would have thought up. And you then initiate an argument about what the Bible says. I've often found in my life that one of the most challenging things for people to say when they're anti-religious, well, who do you think Christ was? Who was he? He plainly existed. It's a nonsense to say there's no historical evidence. He's better attested to than just about any other figure in ancient history. Who was he? And then you've got the C.S. Lewis dilemma, have you not? He was either who he said he was, or he was on the level of a man who thinks he's a poached egg, or a madman. You don't have many options. So there are always ways in by questioning, I think. I think we need to be better at it. Always respectful, always well-motivated, always, to the greatest degree possible, well-informed, but a great deal of what might be called mob thought is quite superficial intellectually. On postmodernism, you say it's not, I can only say to you, there's a limit to what I can do in a short address, but can I recommend James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose's book, Critical Thinking, altered to Cynical, Critical Theory, and they've altered it to Cynical Theory. They obviously, philosophically in many ways, come from a different place to me, but I think they mount a pretty convincing case. Thank you, and I appreciate the question. At heart, thank you for your kind remark about the conversations. There's about 70 there on the site, and they are with a very wide range of perspectives. I mentioned Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. They were two of the three academics who wrote 20 spoof papers, academic papers, for critical theory journals around the world, and of the 20, 11, I think, were published. They were all spoofs, but they were published as serious pieces. One of them was called What We Can Learn About Rape Culture from Observing Canines in Public Parks, and it was published as a serious piece of work and then revealed to be the spoof that it was. So the point that I think Steven Pinker made, another atheist but a clear thinker, a great deal of the academic puffery that is now infiltrating our universities, and what's really significant about that is so many people now go to universities, and it's where our teachers are drawn from. Australia's greatest historian is obviously Geoffrey Blainey, and he gently makes the point in one of those conversations that we worry about what's happening in our universities, but it's actually what our primary school children are learning out of the people who are trained in the universities that so limits their ability to genuinely inquire and genuinely look for and seek out answers that are robust. Look, two comments. One is, there is a tremendous pushback, including in the Parliament. You are now seeing a real effort on the part of a lot of people to say, look, we've turned everything that gave us our freedoms and our traditions and so forth on their head, and the results are a disaster. So you are getting pushback. You've seen a Jonathan Haidt, for example, from the left, start the Heterodox Academy, which is meaning that people now who think outside the square have got a place to go, and thousands of academics have joined it, including a lot from this country. That's very welcome. But here's another reality. It's going to be forced on us. This country now faces the most challenging environment since the 1930s. If we are not prepared in the current climate and the one that is going to descend upon us over the next 5 years to face reality and recognise that whether you live in Queensland or in Tasmania or Western Australia, regardless of your political philosophy, what pronoun you put in front of your name, you have in common with your fellow Australians an interest in freedom and in democracy and in prosperity. And those are the core responsibilities for the federal government to uphold. If we are not going to recognise the joint challenges we face and to once again embrace the need to recognise the things that we have in common and the things that we have in terms of shared needs far outweigh the things that divide us, well, we don't deserve a continuation of those freedoms. It is time as never before to pull together. And my final comment, because I give long answered answers, and I'm sorry, I meant what I said about the remarkable impact on young people, because when they're given options and the reality to say, look, this isn't working, and that's what's happening. There are young people everywhere who are saying, hang on, this doesn't make sense. I saw 1,000 people, 500 or 600 of them under 30, pack out a hall to hear Jordan Peterson. He wasn't a rock star. He's not a motivational speaker. He's not a great sportsman. He's a Canadian psychologist. And he's not telling them how clever they are. He's saying, life's tough. And you know it's tough. And you need to sort things out. And it was packed full of fine young Australian men looking for direction and purpose. The sort of people that would have volunteered to help us all out in 1914 and 1939. And we've got to encourage every single one of them. And perhaps that should have been on my list of to-dos. Mentor fine young Australians wherever you can find them and whenever they come to you. It's just about where real power lies, all right? A friend of mine was lining up at the counter one day to fly to LA. The person in front of him was very abusive to the girl trying to check he and his luggage in. When my friend finally got there, he said, look, I just have to compliment you on the calm and patient and non-emotional way that you responded to that oaf who was so personally nasty. Oh, he said, we're very well trained here. We're taught rigorously never to take it personally and just to think to ourselves, well, he had a bad oyster last night, or, he had a 3-point turn and he wasn't responsible for it, and somebody ran into his car on the way into town, or whatever, he's got a gut ache. Never to think of it personally. Always think, and my friend said, but, you must want to take it out on it. Me take it? No, I'd never want to take it out on. You are, aren't you? He's going to pay a price. No! You protest too much. What have you done? Well, she said, don't tell anybody, but you're both flying to LA, and when you get there in the morning, you'll both find your luggage on carousel 2, yours in LA and his in Amsterdam.